In the quiet, sunny, suburban neighborhoods of Altamonte Springs, Florida, the summer of 1988 felt safe. It felt normal. This was a place of perfectly manicured lawns, neighborhood block parties, and a quiet, settled peace. Here lived the Carr family, Doyle, his wife Peggy, and their two young sons. They were an American family, enjoying the simple comfort of their life. Peggy and Doyle were inseparable. She ran a tight, loving home. He worked hard. Their bond was the kind that gave the neighbors faith in marriage. They had a home, a dog, and a future. Everything, on the surface, looked solid, reliable, and utterly transparent. There were no arguments that spilled onto the driveway, no slamming doors, no visible friction. There was simply the smooth daily rhythm of a happy family. This facade of American stability is precisely what made the true events so terrifying. Because what happens when the poison isn't in the product you buy, but in the trust you place in the people around you? What happens when your beautiful, ordinary life is a stage for a meticulous, cold-blooded crime? The mystery of the poisoned Coke began on a seemingly routine morning. On their kitchen counter sat a 2-liter bottle of Coca-Cola, purchased just the day before, the kind of drink shared by thousands of families across the United States every single hour. Doyle, Peggy, and the boys all took a drink. But this Coke was fundamentally different. Within hours, the symptoms began: excruciating pain, hair loss, and a rapid deterioration that baffled local doctors across Seminole County, Florida. It was a slow-motion catastrophe that landed Peggy Carr in the emergency room, fighting for her life. This was no simple illness. This was a deliberate attack. Police quickly confirmed their terrifying suspicion. The Coke had been tainted with thallium, a highly toxic, tasteless, and colorless metal. It was a poison used to kill rats, but now aimed at a mother and her children. The search for the perpetrator began. Was it a vengeful former colleague? Was it an angry stranger attempting random domestic terror? Police chased every anonymous lead, exhausting every public avenue, searching for the face of a monster they thought was lurking far away. They chased shadows, not realizing the motive, the method, and the sheer audacity of the killer was being hidden by a mountain of carefully constructed lies. It would take 72 days of agonizing illness before Peggy Carr succumbed to the poison. And the shocking truth that emerged was that this horrifying act was not random, but deeply personal. It was an act of calculated cruelty, masterminded by someone they knew, someone they waved to across the street, someone who had built an entire existence on betrayal. The mystery of the poisoned Coke was about to reveal the chilling truth. Sometimes, the greatest crime is committed by the one person whose lies you never think to question. Music swells slightly, then cuts abruptly to silence. The initial investigation was a frantic search for chaos. Police assumed this was a random act, a disgruntled employee at the Coca-Cola bottling plant in Orlando, perhaps, or a sick individual attempting mass poisoning. But this case was not random. It was surgical, and the killer made sure the police were looking in exactly the wrong direction. Just days after Peggy Carr was admitted to the hospital, her symptoms escalating from severe stomach pain to terrifying paralysis, a crucial piece of evidence arrived. An anonymous note delivered to a local mailbox in the Altamonte Springs community. This wasn't a confession, it was a demand. The note was crude, misspelled, and threatening, demanding that the Carr family move out of their home immediately. It was carefully crafted to look like the work of a vandal, a neighbor with a petty grievance who had escalated into domestic terrorism. It directed the police to look for a madman, an amateur driven by simple jealousy or hate. This anonymous note became the foundation of the case and the lie that obscured the truth for months. It sent detectives on wild chases through neighborhood disputes, examining feuds over property lines and noise complaints. The note itself was a masterpiece of deception. It convinced the investigators that the crime was about the location, the house, the suburban street. But the crime was never about the house. It was about control and arrogance. The person who poisoned the Coke didn't want the family to move. He wanted them dead. The note was simply a brilliant piece of misdirection, a self-serving red herring designed to establish a false motive and protect the perpetrator's own facade. While Peggy lay suffering in the hospital, the community rallied around the Carr family. Donations poured in, meals were delivered, and among the kind faces and helping hands was a man who seemed especially solicitous, especially concerned, a neighbor, an acquaintance of Doyle's who lived just down the street, a man named George Trepal. Trepal volunteered his time. He offered condolences. He discussed the strange, anonymous note with the neighbors, speculating right alongside the very police he had managed to fool. He was the perfect, compassionate community member, standing in plain sight while the entire weight of the investigation chased his intricate, calculated lies. For police to catch him, they would have to completely abandon their initial assumptions. They would have to look past the crude, anonymous lie on the note and realize the monster they sought was not an amateur vandal, but a meticulously planned killer, a man whose entire life was a carefully constructed betrayal of the trust placed in him. They had to realize the threat wasn't from a stranger on the outside, but from the man next door. As the early weeks of the investigation yielded only the dead end of the anonymous note, the police were stuck chasing a phantom, a random, angry citizen. They were fundamentally misreading the crime. The person they sought was not driven by pettiness, but by a chilling, narcissistic need for validation. George Trepal, the neighbor, embodied this. Trepal was a self-taught, self-styled genius who believed his intellect was vastly superior to everyone around him, particularly the local authorities in Seminole County. He had a deep, private fascination with poisons, seeing them not as tools of murder, but as instruments of control and intellectual triumph. For him, the poisoning of the Carr family was not just a crime, it was an experiment, a sophisticated puzzle he had laid out for the world to fail to solve. His choice of thallium was an expression of his arrogance. This substance was notoriously difficult to detect, earning it the grim nickname, the poisoner's poison. Trepal calculated that the agonizing, slow-onset symptoms would perfectly mimic natural illness, allowing him to observe the resulting chaos while remaining above suspicion. His lies were not spoken, they were chemical. The case only began to crack when the focus shifted from the external threat to the internal, psychological one. The police needed a road into the killer's mind, and that road was paved by George Trepal's wife, Diana. Diana, a pharmacist, provided a critical, disturbing piece of information about her husband's bizarre obsessions. She knew, perhaps better than anyone, the depth of his psychological manipulations and his capability for betrayal. She had lived under the shadow of his intellectual cruelty and recognized the potential for his dark fantasies to become reality. Diana's eventual decision to speak with authorities, connecting Trepal's interest in poisons to the mystery of Peggy Carr's death, was an act of personal courage that exposed the fundamental flaw in Trepal's perfect plan. He couldn't control his own family, and he couldn't anticipate the consequences of his actions on the one person closest to him. Her cooperation provided the essential framework, the motive, that allowed investigators to discard the initial anonymous lie and focus on the man living quietly in their midst. With the target identified, the complexity of the case only deepened. Trepal was too intelligent to be caught by conventional means. He would never confess to a simple question. The police understood that to expose the depth of his betrayal and the magnitude of his lies, they would have to create an environment where his own arrogance would lead him to confess without realizing it. They needed a lie detector test, not for the suspect, but for the very framework of reality. The police understood the fundamental truth about George Trepal. He valued his intellectual image more than his freedom. Their plan, therefore, was not to threaten him, but to flatter him. The FBI and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement launched an elaborate high-risk sting operation that leveraged Trepal's most dangerous psychological trait, his conceit. The key agent was a woman named Susan, who infiltrated Trepal's life posing as a fellow member of a fictional, secret underground organization. Susan appealed directly to his expertise, claiming their group was a sophisticated drug and crime syndicate in the Daytona Beach area that desperately needed his unique knowledge of untraceable substances. This was the master lie used against the master liar. Trepal immediately embraced the role of the criminal mastermind. He began writing Susan lengthy philosophical letters that served as his criminal diary. These were not casual notes. They were chilling, detailed correspondences filled with coded language about deception, murder, and disposal. He wrote about the technical challenges of killing, the difficulty of detection, and the necessity of complete psychological control over one's victims. These letters were not evidence of his involvement in the drug ring. They were direct evidence of his murderous intent and his philosophical justification for the crime. The betrayal was meticulously documented. Trepal, completely fooled by the fabricated scenario, grew bolder. He gifted Susan a handwritten instructional manual, a chilling how-to guide for using thallium to kill. The document included precise dosages, chemical properties, and, most damningly, a detailed explanation of how to make the death appear like natural illness, a carbon copy of the method used to kill Peggy Carr. This manual was Trepal's own arrogance turning against him, a monumental act of self-betrayal. The final nail in the coffin came when agents successfully planted a listening device in the Trepal residence. The microphone captured Trepal conversing with his wife, Diana, discussing the Carr case in casual, damning detail. In one moment, his voice, flat and unconcerned, confirmed that he was the author of the anonymous threatening letter. The man who had crafted a complex structure of lies to send police on a wild goose chase had, in the comfort of his own home, dismantled his entire defense with a single boastful conversation. The mystery was solved not by fingerprint dusting or eyewitness testimony, but by the relentless exploitation of the killer's vanity. The police used deception to expose his betrayal, and the man who thought he had committed the perfect crime was caught because he simply could not resist documenting his own genius. With the elaborate lies of George Trepal completely unmasked, the trial in Sanford, Florida, became a necessary public reckoning. It was the formal closure to the horrific mystery that had hung over Seminole County. The courtroom was not just judging a man, it was judging the catastrophic consequence of profound betrayal. The prosecution presented the evidence that shattered the facade of the quiet neighbor, the poisoner's manual, the chilling instructional tapes, and the confession where Trepal casually admitted to planting the anonymous letter, the very first lie that sent police down the wrong path. The key difference between this crime and others was the killer's motivation. Trepal was not driven by passion or vengeance, but by a detached intellectual curiosity and an overwhelming hunger for power. He had committed the ultimate psychological betrayal of the community's trust, and he showed no true remorse. His defense attempted to portray him as a misunderstood eccentric, but the weight of his own calculated words and actions was too great. Trepal's defense was fatally undermined by his own arrogance. He believed he was smart enough to talk his way out of the meticulous evidence, but the jury saw the agonizing human cost detailed through the victim impact statements, the 72 days of Peggy Carr's suffering, and the long-term poisoning effects suffered by her husband and sons. They recognized the man who had lived a double life, hiding his lethal secrets under a veneer of suburban respectability. The final verdict, guilty, was delivered with swiftness. George Trepal was sentenced to death. The closure of the case served as a bitter lesson across the United States. It demonstrated that the most sophisticated crimes are often disguised as the mundane. The fear was no longer that of the distant stranger, but of the neighbor, the colleague, the trusted acquaintance whose hidden life contained the capacity for profound deception. The mystery was solved, but the wounds remain. Trepal, even years after the conviction, continued to demonstrate his warped sense of self-importance. His only regret was that his lies had been uncovered, not that a life was lost. His final acts were defined by the same chilling narcissism that started the crime. The betrayal of the perfect partner and neighbor became an enduring symbol of the darkness that can exist just behind the closed door next to yours. The file is closed, but the constant shadow of his lies is a permanent reminder on that quiet street in Altamonte Springs.